to the Longest Turn Board Gaming Podcast. This is a bonus episode for a preview of a game that's currently on Kickstarter called Ascendancy. I previously recorded this episode with the Hungry Gamer Will Brown, and this is posted already on his YouTube channel. So if you've watched it there, this is the same content. We just are reproducing it in audio version. So I hope you enjoy.
Welcome, folks. Jay the Hungry Gamer is back with another game preview, and today we have a little bit of a new format. I'm joined by Tyson Mertlick of the Longest Turn Board Game Podcast, which is also the longest name board game podcast out there. And he and I just this morning did a demo of Ascendancy, which somewhere there's a picture of the box cover. And since this game only has about just under 2 weeks left on Kickstarter, we thought we'd just kind of talk about it, about our pros, about our cons. And for myself, this is very much a first impressions. Even though they were kind of to reach out to me a while ago, I couldn't cover it. They offered to send me a prototype. It just did not work with my schedule because this is a big game. But I got a demo done today. Now, Tyson's been very, very excited about this game since Gen Con, and he's done a lot of research into it. So if you want informed critique, listen to him. If you want the best critique, listen to me. But before we jump into, Tyson, give yourself a little plug for your podcast.
Yeah, so like Will said, my name is Tyson. I am a third of the host on the Longest Turn Board Gaming Podcast. We've been a podcast for about 2 years now, and we put out a lot of content in regards to
one episode.
Yep, we've got one episode. Oh, we're close to 50. We're close to 50 episodes now. But we do a lot of reviews. We do top 5 lists. We do a lot of little things like that, and do some interviews, things of that nature. We just like to play board games and talk about them. So that's generally what we do.
All right. So this game that we played today, it's called Ascendancy. It is a 4X meets worker placement Euro game. Is how it's built. That's how it's built. And it's a kind of a fantasy realm. I think you're trying to rule the kingdom. I'm not fully sure. What are we trying to do?
It's your typical 4X experience. You're trying to expand, exterminate, exploit, and I always forget an X, but we're trying to explore. Hey, that's the one I'm missing.
Yep.
So you're trying to do all those things, and I think that this game is possibly the most ambitious 4X game I've ever seen, in that it throws the kitchen sink at it, and that there's so much content and different things that it can do.
All right. So we'll jump right straight in. Did you get the 4 X's, even though you don't know what one of them is?
That's a great question. So the way the game works is it's I think mostly, honestly, I think it's a worker placement game. And
100% it's a worker placement game.
In the game, you have 4 different worker placement board areas. These areas all, I believe, loosely tied to one of the 4 X's. One allows you to explore the map a little bit more. One allows you to expand your empire. And one allows you to exploit the resources that are available in the land, etc. So yes, I do think in a sheer technical sense, it does. I don't know. What was your experience, Will? Do you feel like you felt that?
I mean, I didn't do any expanding because I'm bad at games, but I could have. And it was interesting because the two that I felt were the lightest were the expand and the exterminate, because I had to choose, do I want to expand or do I want to exterminate? Because both that conquest action where I got to fight my giant bugs and where you were putting down tiles were on the same board. So those were the two lightest, but they were definitely there. I mean, I can't think of any 4X games where all 4 of them were like intense. But the expand and exterminate felt the lightest to me.
No, I think I'd agree with that in general, at least from my perspective. But I think it's worth noting that we played a 3-decade game. In this game, what you can do is a decade is a round. So each round, you're supposed to have expanded a decade's worth of time in terms of the game. We played 3 decades worth. And really, that's considered what the short game. The short game is 3 decades, and then the you can play 10 plus if you want. I think what I've understood is that the recommended most decades you should play is probably 9. And then after that, it kind of goes off the rails a bit and you're sandbox making your own stuff. So we only played a 3 decade. So maybe in a larger decade experience, you could get more of that.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And so we mentioned early on that there was the main mechanic of this game is worker placement, which I think kind of pushes it in a new direction for most 4X games because I don't love 4X games, but the ones that I like Uprising, the co-op 4X game. I like Eclipse. I like Fractal. I like Last Light too. Last Light's hadn't quite delivered hasn't quite delivered yet, but I played it. And none of those are based off worker placement. So I thought that was pretty darn cool. And that's a pretty high up on the pro for me. Now, before I jump in any further, I will say the three of us that played today, none of us particularly jived with the demo itself. The demo itself was a little bit of a style that just didn't we didn't really jive with it. Not to say the game is bad or anything like that, but it was a harder experience for us to understand because the guy running the demo, lovely guy, was clearly had to do other stuff. And clearly
he's busy with a Kickstarter.
Yeah, like I feel like it should have said this is not a good time to do a demo some other time. So it was clearly distraction. So we were fighting against that a little bit. And I want to throw that out there. So if people feel like we're being overly harsh or whatever, that was definitely part of it. And it was on Tabletop Simulator, which means it probably added half an hour to the game. Probably. And we played about 2 hours for a 3-turn game. So I feel like it's probably 90 minutes once you really know what you're doing for the short game. And I don't know what the medium game is supposed to be. But so with that said, what are your pros that you took away from this? And you have as many as you want. We'll just go back and forth, as many of them as you want. But don't take too long because I haven't had dinner yet.
Oh yeah. We got to get you fed. I think for me, honestly, the one thing that if I could point at that I think is the best possible thing about this game is the worker placement. By and far, I think they do some innovative things with this worker placement that I haven't seen in almost any other design. And they do it in a way that I think is really interesting. I love the worker placement in this game. Essentially what you do, like I said, you got those 4 boards, and the interesting thing is that you don't send your workers to all of those 4 boards at one point in time. Instead, what you're doing is each phase is a board that you can send to. So you can decide to commit as many workers as you want on the earlier boards, but you will have a deficit in workers on the later boards if you're not being careful. So it's this kind of decision tree that's in there that I think is really interesting and unique in that, do I invest a lot of my workers to get a lot of the early stuff on in the game, or do I wait and make sure that I'm doing a little bit of everything?
Yeah, it almost has a little bit of programmer in there as well, because you have to make that choice somewhat early on. And I'm with you. I thought it was very, very fresh, and it did a second part that I liked about it. And it's is not the only game. There's a game I just talked about recently called Treasure Mountain, which is this older worker placement game where you're a bunch of dwarves, and you can bump people from their spots if your dwarf has a longer beard, and which is obviously. And this does a little bit of the same thing. A more powerful worker someone has can kick you out of a spot, which I always really enjoy that ability where you're never fully safe, but of course it's gonna cost you if you want to go back, which what you're saying, you can do multiple things on the earlier spots, but it does cost you because if you do 2 things early, unless I misunderstood, you cannot do the last spot. I don't think. No. I guess you can because you can always have your lord there, but there's a floor of level of worker you can put there. So if you put a second worker somewhere on the first one of those later 3 spots, you will not be allowed to do. So it's a very, very interesting little choice.
Yeah, at the start of the game, you have 4 different kinds of workers. You have an outcast worker, you have a laborer, you have I think lord or lady, and I'm missing one. But you have like these classes of individuals, and certain classes can go to certain boards, which is thematic in that only the royals can go in the royal area of the board. So exactly what you're saying, Will, is that you can take one of those more advanced, more privileged workers and bring them down to a lower classes area and knock people out with them. But that means that you've used your higher class, and an outcast, the lowest class, cannot go up to any of the higher class areas. It's just taboo. You're not allowed to do that.
Well, because you're unclean and they don't want you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the other things that I particularly enjoyed about it was I liked that our four factions were very different. Now, it wasn't like a game of Dwellings of Eldervale or something where they're very different and it's immediately obvious this is your power. It's a little bit of a slow build, but as we started building our buildings and getting our heroes, our abilities became much very disparate. And it was different to begin with, but I definitely felt like there was things that I did better as the red faction. I did far better than you did, mostly losing, but I did it really, really well. And I always love that. I love if we're going to have different factions. I want every faction to feel unfair in some way, shape, or form. And it's not quite there, but I think it's close.
I feel very similar about that part as well, because the asymmetry between the factions is, it starts off as, yes, it's apparent, just like you said, but throughout the game, I like the idea that you can upgrade and unveil the tech tree that is on your board, and you can kind of become even more specialized in whatever your faction's ability is. I think Steve, your brother that we were playing with, he had the illusionist faction, the Dread Pirate Roberts faction, the pirate faction, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they could manipulate time and make illusion type of things happen. And it was really interesting to see how much different that was to either of our factions. And I like that.
Yeah, I had like the barbarian faction, and I don't know what your nonsense was. Winning, I guess.
Yeah, that seemed about right.
It feels like everybody play purple and you win. Is what my main takeaway. But also, I mean, I assume that the game's going to look like this, but it seems like he has put into TTS the game trays, because the way that when you upgrade your buildings and you build things, like you can't see this, everybody, because you're just looking at our two dumb faces, but the cards slide up, and as the cards slide up as you build things, it opens new spots to drop cubes. It's production wise, potentially it's really, really cool. I mean, who knows what it turns out to be. And I assume that's the deluxe that we were looking at. But
what I understand, that's the base game, comes with the game trays and everything. So the storage system is all there in the base game, but there is some deluxeified components that you can add to it, like coins and increase minis. You can add minis and things like that. Honestly, after we played this on TTS today, I thought for me that the base game is adequate. Like I don't necessarily need to add on any of the extra stuff, and honestly, I don't really. It doesn't enhance the experience for me necessarily. I was thinking about the minis, for example. The minis are of your house leader. And if you're playing a legacy version of the game, because by the way, there's legacy components into this game. If you're playing a legacy version of this game, it's kind of a generational thing, and your house is supposed to go on from generation to generation. So like that mini represents your house, who you're playing as, but you get champions throughout the game. So to me, I didn't really care about the minis necessarily. And it felt more appropriate that you have these acrylic standees that represent your faction.
I'd love acrylic standees. I mean, I really do. Now, I have something that's going to kind of veer us into the potential cons of the game, or the quibbles behind the game. Anything else you wanted to highlight as something that you really, really dug?
There's one more thing I did want to put as something that I really enjoyed. It was the buildings. So from a worker placement standpoint, again, this goes back to the worker placement, and I really like worker placement stuff. But I really enjoyed that you could make buildings in this and bring out new building cards from your decks and put them on different spots. They now unlock a space that is available to anybody, but you get an extra bonus, which I love a worker placement game that can give me that something that is uniquely mine, and that also allows worker placement spots to change up throughout the game. I think that's phenomenal.
It was almost like Lords of Waterdeep on steroids, right? Because instead of just a couple of resources, it's like significant benefits by building your different buildings, and that's also that kind of the cards sliding up and unlocking new powers and things that you could unlock and bonuses. Very, very clever. I'm glad you brought that up. I'd forgotten that, but yeah, that was super cool. That was one of the things I really liked. Now I'm going to move into something that I enjoyed, but I can 100% see a lot of people really not enjoying: the dice. This is a Euro game with a lot of stuff determined by dice. Combats determined by dice. All your kind of skill checks, dice. So you are chucking dice a lot. Now, for me, that is fantastic. That's why I love Dwellings of Eldervale. You're chucking dice. That's what's determining what's going on. However, the people that hate Dwellings of Eldervale hate it. Why? Because of the dice. So, and I feel like the reason why people who don't like Dwellings of Eldervale don't like it, it's because of the dice. So, how did you feel? Because I mean, it's more dice chucking, I feel like, than you get in Dwellings of Eldervale, because you're not doing it just for the fighting. You're also doing it for these skill checks, which are like, at least in our game, were important because of the, well, I guess when you're doing the conquering of the different territory, which I didn't do, you have to do it there. But I also built a Coliseum, which had us chucking dice as well. So what were your thoughts on the dice?
It's interesting you bring up Dwellings of Eldervale. Somebody else asked me about that. Do I think Dwellings of Eldervale and Ascendancy are comparable? In what you're saying, I absolutely agree with. Yes, they actually look similar in some ways with the game trays and the colors and the presentation and
lots of hexes, yeah, worker placement and dice. So clearly, it's the same game.
Exactly, it's the same. I've played Dwellings of Eldervale only one time, so take that for what it's worth. I have that experience that you're describing. That I don't love the dice chucking in Dwellings of Eldervale. I don't love the dice chucking in Ascendancy either. I'm the type of person that you just described that is
boring.
I don't want that. Yeah, exactly. You know my play style, Will, and you know that I like the drier themes. I'm okay with that, but I do like a good thematic experience as well. I don't feel like, for me, sometimes dice chucking does that when it's specifically a dice chucker, and I feel like that's what this is. The dice in this game is probably the weakest part of it, in my opinion. I think that like the combats are not that engaging. Essentially, all you're doing is you have abilities that you can unlock, and then you roll dice to see if they hit. And then if they don't, then you go through this cyclical process of let's roll, let's check, let's roll, let's check, let's roll. And it doesn't give me anything super satisfying in that. And the other problem I have with the combat, honestly, is that essentially, because that's an individual thing most of the time, you can play with PvP, but in what we were doing, we weren't doing any PvP. We were only doing fights against creatures. And if you aren't fighting that round, you're sitting around watching a fight happen. And they're pretty quick for the most part, to be fair. So you're not waiting around too long. But I do worry that there is that kind of downtime where I'm sitting there waiting for this experience to unfold so that I can get into the next spot.
Yeah, we did have one turn that we waited forever to somebody finish. You remember who that was?
I don't know, but probably somebody who has a podcast called The Longest Turn.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, the designer did say when we were playing that almost everything when you're doing your resolutions can be done simultaneously. And so there was that. So that does cut down the time. But to your point, I do agree that the comparison with, if you know Dwellings, you know that when you're doing your combat, it's everyone rolls their dice. Maybe one person has a card or two that they can play, and that is, I'm going to play Lightning Bolt. Okay, I'm going to play one too. Done. And this is a little bit back and forth because you're the bad guy's going to roll their dice, and you're going to take a thing, your damage, and maybe you use some of your stamina. So your combat is purely Euro style. You're going to spend your stamina and do an ability, hit them, and then the bad guys are rolling dice to determine their attack and their defense. And so you go back and forth maybe 2 or 3 times, and it's relatively quick, but there is a little bit of, they roll a die, okay, I did that, how do I respond? So it's not the most interesting dice combat. Though for me, like I said, I enjoy dice chucking in combat, and I like that risk. Like there's always a thing where we watch Steve pull up an abyssal basilisk and we're like, you're stupid. But, the beauty of the dice combat there becomes, well, if the dice go his way, he could be fine. So there is that excitement to dice that are in there. But want to start with that because you can go either way, and that's super important. This is very much a hybrid game, very much a hybrid game. And, I want to make sure that people get that. One of the other things that you've already touched on is I do think there is potential for some major AP in this game, because especially if you're doing more than a 3-decade game and you start to get, because you had more meeples at the end than we did. You were assassinating, some nonsense you were doing over there.
Yep.
And I got a card right at the very end where I could have chopped off one of my champions' heads and gotten a new person. I was like, I would chop your head off so quick for a new worker. Like,
you mean nothing to me.
Yeah, without question. I'll get a new barbarian with a piece of food later. No NBD, I'm not even going to send a letter to his family because they can't read. They're barbarians. But as you're getting later in the game, I can absolutely see people stopping and thinking, okay, do I want to put another worker here right now? Because now I have enough workers where I could have 2 on one space and 1 later. Do I want to do this? Do I want to heal my guy up right now? Or do I want to wait? There's a lot of decisions going on because there's a lot of interlocking parts. And so I think with some people who maybe have a podcast called the Longest Turn podcast, perhaps this game that I could play in 90 minutes might be 90 hours.
And you are hitting the nail on the head for me. So as that is the case, that is my biggest hesitation here on going all in on this for me and my group. And I know this is not going to be for everybody. As you already explained, there are different types of group that this will work really well for. But if you're the type of group where people like to take their time and take their turns, maybe people like to talk in between, this is going to take a long time, even in the 3-decade kind of scenario. And honestly, though, I think that this game is going to shine most in the 6+ decade kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have the time or the ability to invest a 3, 4, 5, 6+ hour day on this game, then this may not be for you because of that.
On the other hand, nowhere in the quibble section, but on the other hand, if you're a fast playing group and you are okay with that, we've made choices, they weren't optimal, but now we're going to deal with it, and you can cook through a game. I mean, there's a lot. There is a lot here because we played one scenario and I was glancing up at the top. I think there's 8, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of different ways you can play this, and there's a lot going on. We barely scratched the surface in this thing today. So, I mean, there's a lot going on, but it's very much like with the dice combat. It's either you like that or you don't. It's very much either side of the coin there. The only other thing that I'm going to call as a potential quibble is the legacy elements. I love me a campaign. And this is not a legacy style game that like you're ripping things up. It's resettable. But I'm not sure that it's not the strong get stronger and the winners are going to keep winning. Now, to be fair, the designer did say that if you select like the scenario thing, everyone can use it, or if your reward for winning, you select a vice, which you have to work hard to turn into a virtue. But I'm just not sure that if I am playing against somebody who's just at the beginning, just is not as good at this kind of game, I'm not going to get ahead and just keep on staying ahead with an advantage. So that to me is a concern, though you don't have to play this thing legacy at all. It very much strikes me like it could be like a Frostpunk style game, which is nowhere near the same, but Frostpunk has a bunch of different scenarios you can play, and they're all one-offs and all very different. But if you want to play Legacy, look closer, because I'm not sure that it's not as strong gets stronger. I was not convinced the other way.
And that's an interesting point, because that's similar to what I felt in a lot of ways, is that this game, as much research as I've done into this game and looked into it, it does have all of these different possibilities you can do. I don't know at this point. I've played a solo experience and I've played this experience today. I don't know where the optimal best experience lies in this game. And because there's so much things that you can turn on and off, it's not just one scenario that I'm selecting. I'm also selecting, am I doing it competitively? Am I doing it cooperatively? Am I doing this solo? Am I doing this by adding PvP to the game? Or can we do trades in the game? Can I turn on events? Can I turn on these other things? There's a lot to unpack here. And I think it's going to take a long time if you get this game, it's going to take a long time for you to find where that best experience for you and your group is. So if you're going to be willing to put the time into it, I think that's going to be very worthwhile, because there's a lot of stuff to really like about what it is doing. But I do have the concerns that if you're like me, where you play a game two, three, four, five times and you don't get into the lifestyle experiences, then you may not be able to get the full experience out of what this game has to offer. And I think that's a shame, because it has the potential to offer a lot.
I've only played once now, and I don't really have a full opinion on it. I probably need to play 3 times, maybe 4 times before I'm like, okay, I can talk about this intelligently,
Right.
which is what I expected, which is why I did not do a full review, because I just knew I don't have that kind of time. But that's a commitment. And if, like a lot of people, I mean, how many games do you have that you've played 10 times?
This year, I think I'm at, if we're not counting online plays like Board Game Arena,
No, get those out of here.
then
I love online play, but they don't count.
I've got like 2 or 3, and they're solo plays mostly.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking this year, I'm pulling up my little stats thing. I bet I have 0 I played 10 times this year, is my guess. I have 2 that I've played 10 times this year. And then 1 I've played 8. And then the next where we're talking 6s, 5s, and so on down the line after that. But I mean, so you're really going to have to put the time into it. Any other quibbles that you have before we jump into kind of our final ideas?
Yeah, there's one last one that I wanted to mention, because I have had the opportunity now to play the solo experience and to play the multiplayer experience. I will say that for me, let me preface this by saying I love a good solo game. I play solo a lot, and I enjoy a good solo experience. This, I think, has a good solo experience, but it's an inferior experience so far from what I've witnessed. And again, you have to take this with a grain of salt, given the fact that I've only seen a fraction of what it has to offer. But it is not as good for me as the multiplayer experience was, primarily because in a solo experience, you're adding these characters that are called nemesis, right? So you can add multiple different nemesis into your game, and they are primarily going to conquer, is what they're doing. They're expanding their empire and going on the map. And
then they're blocking you. They're blocking you in
yes.
places. Yeah.
So at the start of every round, you're going to roll a die to see where they go, and they're going to place all of their workers at the start before you get a chance to place on any of the boards. And because of that, I think that makes an interesting experience. You get to see where's blocked and whatnot. But those, from what I can tell, those spaces are not limited by player count. So if you're playing 1 versus 1 on a Nemesis experience, then it may or may not block something that you care about. And because I have the ability to use a higher worker, I can knock something out of there and use it. So it may or may not matter. But my ultimate problem becomes that I don't feel like I get the full multiplayer experience out of that solo experience, because there's no strategy really to what that nemesis is doing necessarily, which in a multiplayer game, it's good. I actually really liked the nemesis character a lot, because it added a complexity to it. And
yeah, it tightened the game up for us. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've played Coloma, but if you play low player count Coloma, they have Buster, which it's just out there to tighten the game. And I like that kind of thing. It definitely, I was hesitant about it when we played today, but I was like, no, I had no, other than the fact that I was teamed up with the Nemesis and the Nemesis. No, I was teamed with my brother. Yeah, the Nemesis. I was teamed up with my Nemesis, and we sucked.
Yeah, but like that's exactly it. Like I like it. I think the Nemesis works really well in that experience, but because there's no strategy to what it's doing, it makes it seem like in a solo experience, I can do pretty much whatever I want. And yes, there are obstacles to overcome and things to do, but for me, it didn't feel as exciting with the worker placement element, which is my favorite part of this game, that it takes away the excitement of that worker placement, because a player who is looking at what I'm doing and what they're doing and how they can strategically place something is going to be a more complete experience for me.
Yeah. All right. So what's your final take on this? Because we spent a good chunk of time at the beginning talking what we liked and a good chunk of time talking about our quibbles about it. What's your takeaway on this?
again, I'm going to come back to that worker placement in this game. I think it does a phenomenal job at worker placement in ways that I haven't seen. I want that experience from that worker placement, and I want to have that in a lot of games. I think it does it well, but I think that for it to be done the best, you need to have multiple decades, 4 or 5, probably 6, for you to get that full experience out of what that is offering. So if that's something for you where you can invest that amount of time, then this may be a very good experience for you to try out. For me, I don't know if that's something that I can invest in, but at least on the solo side, I can still, time is irrelevant on the solo side, so I can keep it set up in my vault and play it whenever I need to. But again, I'm not sure, based off of the solo experience I've had versus the multiplayer experience I've had, whether or not I'm getting the same game experience by just doing it for solo or not. I love everything this game has to offer in general. I love how ambitious it is, and I love that it is trying to tackle all of these different things, and I want to love it. I still, honest, if I'm being honest with myself, I haven't come to any strict conclusions. I need to do more to be able to feel confident in saying whether or not this is going to be a fantastic, amazing game, or whether or not this is going to be a game in which it might go by the wayside. And I don't know at this point. I need more time with it.
I feel like, now I will say I didn't ask the question and I wish I had, but I did get the vibe that there's definitely development still happening on this game. And I think, to me, that's very important, because a lot of these things could easily be tightened up very, very easily. And so I feel like this is, I mean, I'm very intrigued by it. Like, actually, I do want to play this game again. And I've already hit the little heart symbol, so I can, consider what I want to do, if I want to get it or not. But it's a very intriguing game. It's not completely different from anything I own. It does remind me of some other things, but it's fairly unique. It has so much stuff going for it that I really, really like. I think my biggest question is going to come down to is, is the game unique and interesting enough to warrant potential multiple 3-hour plays? Because not everybody plays at my speed. Does it warrant that? And do I have people that want to do that? Because, I mean, you look behind me, I got all this crap all behind me, So many things there, but I mean, it has the potential to be developed into a brilliant game, or it might just be a pretty good game. And right now I think it's a pretty good game that I'm curious to try again. And so that's probably the most useless conclusion of any review ever that we've both given. And to fit your theme, it was really long.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, we spent a long time to get to we should play it again.
Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I dug it. I'm super I find this game one of the more intriguing games I've played in recent memory, and I do love a hybrid Euro. I mean, some of my favorite Euros are hybrids. I think of Dwellings of Elder Vale. I love Guildmaster. I like Andromeda's Edge, which I played a billion times, but it's not out yet. I mean, all those things, that hybrid Euro is right up my alley. So, and it's got fantasy, which, that's like 12 points right away from me. Oh, it's fantasy. Wow, it must be good. What can I say? All right. Any last words?
I think you've said it all. I don't want to take any more time because I'm long-winded.
Because we've taken forever. All right, everybody, make sure you check out Longest Turn Board Gaming Podcast. This is Board Game Podcast, which I was way too short. Board Gaming. How long do you think a 6-decade game of the three of you would take?
I don't know if it would end. Like, it would be so long.
It's real time. It's actually 6 decades.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, everybody. So you can check this out on crowdfunding right now. There's a link down in the description. There's also going to be a link to check out Tyson's podcast. Make sure you do that, or don't, whatever. You do you. You can decide right now if you like the cut of his jib, check it out. If you don't, then you probably stopped watching. And so make sure you check that out. As always, if you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, share, maybe become a channel member. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
We like to extend a special thank you to Will Brown for letting me be on his YouTube channel and talk about Ascendancy. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Longest Turn Board Gaming Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out our full-length episodes. We discuss games that we've been playing, do deep dives and feature reviews, share top 5 lists on a variety of board game topics, and discuss all things board game related. For even more Longest Turn, check out our Discord server, Board Game Geek blog and guild, Instagram, and Twitter. All links and information are included in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Welcome to this Longest Turn Board Gaming Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of the Longest Turn Board Gaming Gosh, why do I keep saying contest? Thanks for listening to this episode of the Board Gaming... Oh my goodness, jeez. The Board Gaming... It's just the Board Gaming Podcast, FYI. If this was your first time listening to the Longest Turn Board Gaming Contest, be sure to check out... And I didn't even notice it until I was... Thanks for listening to this episode of the Longest Turn Board Gaming Contest. Oh my gosh!
You did it again. You want me to type it out for you?